The minister appeared on the program and was immediately asked about comments made by President Zelensky last week concerning the western Russian region of Kursk. Among other things, Zelensky had mentioned that Ukraine does not plan to abandon the area and that they have already crossed a line, reaching their goal. The interviewer asked for the minister's thoughts on this stance and whether what Ukraine hopes to achieve is sustainable. The minister responded that, as we all know, Ukraine has been the victim of an attack, and it is only fair that a country defending itself has the right to act, even within the territory of the aggressor. He added that this is supported by international law. In his opinion, Ukraine's incursions have already had a significant psychological impact on Russia and have demonstrated that Ukraine can take the initiative. He also noted that war is not a linear process, as it involves continual fluctuations of gains and losses, with both sides taking the lead in different regions at different times. The minister emphasized that Ukraine had won the conflict over control of the Black Sea and resumed grain exports via the Bosphorus, while Russia has primarily dominated the land arena. However, Ukraine has shown it can surprise Russian forces, leaving Russian leadership uncertain about whether this war will ultimately benefit them. Asked about what a definitive solution might look like and what Poland would recommend, the minister suggested that President Putin could order his chief of staff to withdraw Russian forces from Ukraine. Although he acknowledged that this was unlikely to happen, he emphasized that Russia could end the war in 5 minutes, while Ukraine doesn't have that option, as it is desperately defending not just its independence but, perhaps, its very existence. The interviewer then inquired if the minister believed Ukraine would have to eventually accept losing part of the eastern territory and negotiate with Russia. The minister responded sharply, questioning why anyone would suggest that Ukraine should give up its territory. He argued that the international community has a duty to uphold the law, not only restoring respect for internationally recognized borders but also the security guarantees that the United States, Britain, and Russia provided to Ukraine in 1993 in exchange for it giving up nuclear weapons. He also stressed that Ukraine and Russia have a border treaty signed and ratified by Putin himself, so any negotiation must take that into account. When pressed on the issue of negotiations, especially in the context of potential changes in U.S. political leadership, the minister stressed that the war could indeed end if Ukraine surrendered. However, he rejected the idea of a world where powerful nations can invade their neighbors without consequence, insisting that this would be unacceptable. He added that Ukrainian soldiers are dying heroically on the front lines, but more Russian soldiers are dying, with estimates of around 1,000 Russian deaths per day. In his view, this war is also terrible for Russia, which is destroying its own national wealth to fund it. On whether he believes Putin will eventually stop the war, the minister said he was uncertain. He pointed out that colonial wars often last a long time because the elite, especially Putin, must reach a point where they realize they cannot achieve their objectives at an acceptable cost. When asked about U.S. support, the minister expressed confidence in ongoing support, noting Vice President Kamala Harris's recent comments about NATO and continuing the Biden administration's policies. However, he also acknowledged that some Republican voices have sent mixed messages, with some suggesting that threatening to escalate aid to Ukraine could force Putin to adopt a more realistic stance. The interviewer then shifted focus to China, asking if the U.S. under Trump might prioritize its rivalry with China over the war in Ukraine. The minister agreed that U.S.-China rivalry is here to stay but stressed that it must be managed responsibly. He mentioned his own work in the European Parliament, where he had advocated a policy of collaborating with China where possible on issues like climate change, competing where necessary, particularly economically, and confronting where unavoidable, such as intellectual property theft or attempts to change borders. He cautioned that while Europe had managed the economic costs of decoupling from Russia, a sudden decoupling from China would be much more severe. Lastly, the interviewer brought up the conflict in Gaza, asking the minister for his perspective. He said that while the war in Ukraine had a significant global economic impact, the war in Gaza had a deeper social impact. He pointed out that the same Iranian drones and missiles being sold to Russia for use against Ukraine are also being used to attack Israel. Poland, he explained, empathizes with both nations, recognizing the statehood of Palestine while also supporting Israel's right to live in secure borders. He expressed hope for a two-state solution that would allow both peoples to live peacefully in their own states. Finally, when asked about the potential of a second Trump presidency, the minister diplomatically avoided taking a stance, saying that Poland wished to maintain good relations with whoever wins the U.S. election. On the question of U.S. involvement, the minister expressed confidence that the Biden administration and Vice President Harris would continue supporting Ukraine. However, he acknowledged that the possibility of political change in the U.S. could impact the dynamics of support. He also responded to claims by some Republican figures that a quick end to the war could be achieved by threatening Russia with further military aid. While he did not outright dismiss these claims, he emphasized that Ukraine's struggle is not something that can be hastily resolved, particularly not through a simple ultimatum or negotiation that undermines Ukraine's sovereignty. Turning to broader geopolitical concerns, the minister discussed China's increasing global influence and the potential for shifting U.S. priorities away from Ukraine. He explained that while U.S.-China rivalry is inevitable, it must be managed carefully to avoid unnecessary escalation. He reiterated that the relationship between China and the West is multifaceted and requires a nuanced approach, collaborating on global issues like climate change, competing economically, and confronting China when it seeks to change international norms or borders. He stressed that Europe must remain vigilant, as conflicts involving China could have far-reaching consequences for the continent, given its deep economic ties with both China and the U.S. The minister also spoke at length about the war in Gaza, drawing a parallel between the use of Iranian weapons in both the Ukrainian and Israeli conflicts. He emphasized Poland's balanced approach, recognizing Palestinian statehood while supporting Israel's right to security. He lamented the ongoing violence in the region and expressed hope for a peaceful resolution based on mutual recognition and the establishment of secure borders for both states.